Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to June on the Range, a long-awaited and celebrated BookTube event created by Michael K. Vaughan, designed to celebrate the reading of Western novels uh, throughout the month of June. I've been having a blast. I look forward to June on the Range. It has brought a lot of writing to my attention that I would probably have not paid much attention to otherwise. I read Westerns. In my reading life, I have read lots and lots of Westerns, the serious ones, the so-called serious ones, like True Grit or The Way West or Lonesome Dove, of course. And I've also read lots of cheesy ones. Zane Grey, Riders of the Purple Sage, and a whole bunch of other things, including the Western writings of Edgar Rice Burroughs, for instance. But I knew there was just a gigantic ecosystem of writers out there, and I didn't really pay much attention to them. I figured if I was reading a few Louis L'Amour, I was probably doing a good enough job. So I didn't really pay enough attention to them until June on the Range. And now I've been reading widely, and that has caused a lot of duds. I've encountered a lot of duds, but a lot of interesting stuff too. And night before last, I read a relatively modern Western. Westerns don't really get written anymore. They don't get read anymore. They're not a celebrated subgenre at all. But once upon a time they did, and I read a more modern one, something from like 20 years ago. That was competently done. I just didn't like it. I didn't like the anger that was bubbling underneath the prose. I didn't like the cynicism that was bubbling underneath the prose. I realize those are very, very 20th century things, but I thought I would go back to an older Western for last night, for when I threw a Western on the pile for last night. And I also thought I would go to the paperbacks that I've been accumulating all year instead of reading ebooks. So I did, and I went through a period where I was going book hunting at the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston, and I kept encountering Louis L'Amour novels. So I decided to read a Louis L'Amour novel last night to sort of get the postmodern taste out of my mouth. I read The Tall Stranger in this battered old paperback that I didn't even bother to reinforce because I'm not going to keep this. I doubt that I'm ever going to read it again. And I liked it a lot. This is from the late 1950s. But I've very seldom read a Louis L'Amour novel that I didn't like. Very seldom. Is this a whole painting? Yes, it is. It's a whole painting. Not a particularly good one, but still. And this is... it starts off being the story of a wagon train headed west. Because there were trails. There were wagon trails. There were settler trails heading out from the east along a few recognized lines of land. So there were some routes that were better than others. And your guide was supposed to know which was right, and you get all of your wagons together, all your provisions together, and you are striking out for a new life on someone else's land. And the wagon train in question here, it's full of salt-of-the-earth settler folk, but they run into trouble and are saved from that trouble by the tall stranger, by a big, ready, rough, noble gunman, the perfect kind of Louis L'Amour character, named Rock Bannon. And there's another figure, the kind of figure that you always mark for a villain in Louis L'Amour novels. In most Louis L'Amour novels that I've read, there are two villains. One is brain and one is brawn. It's very seldom that Louis L'Amour puts those two together in one character. The brains and the brawn are always together in his heroes, but they're always separate in his villains. Certainly in this book, it's the case, because the wagon train is seduced by a citified dandy who tells them about another route, a different route than the one they're taking that would be so much easier and lead to so much greater lands. And Rock Bannon wants to dissuade them. This is a bad idea, but they don't listen. They listen to the smooth-talking stranger instead. And Bannon suspects that he has a motive, that he must have a motive. Especially since his route is taking them through Bishop Valley. And Bishop Valley it's not Choctaw or Arapaho that need to be moved out. It's settled by white people. It's pretty easy to tell that this smooth-talking stranger from the east wants to use these settlers as cannon fodder to rustle out Hardy Bishop and his people from Bishop Valley. And the minute that Rock Bannon starts to figure this out and piece it together, he knows whose side he's on. Hardy Bishop he's a terrific secondary character in this book, and he says himself that sure, the Choctaw may go on the warpath one season and then not want to trade and talk the next season. That might be a little bit unpredictable, but he's had a lot more trouble from white men than he has from anyone else. And it looks like that's going to happen again. It looks like that smooth-talking stranger is going to lead a whole bunch of trouble into Bishop Valley with the hope of making it his own. At one point, Rock Bannon reflects on what that incoming group of settlers and maybe their armed escort will find. And I want to read it to you because it's such a quintessential Louis L'Amour passage. This is the reason. It's passages like this, whether they're very explicit or whether they're just implied. It's passages like this that keep a certain demographic of Louis L'Amour readers coming back over and over again to his books. Let Harper, that's the smooth-talking stranger, let Harper come. He would learn what fighting meant. These men were not of the same flesh or the same blood, but the response within them was the same, and the fire that shaped the steel of their natures was the same. They were men bred to the colt, bred to the law of strength, men who knew justice but could fight to defend what was theirs and what they believed. You want to get down, baby? Huh? You want to give them some free yoga? Oh. Go on over there. You can do it. And it does come down to a confrontation. Two confrontations. Because the tall stranger, Rock Bannon, doesn't just confront Harper. He doesn't just confront that alternate guide. He also confronts a mountain of muscle. An enforcer. And Louis L'Amour has L'Amour often has just a storyteller's instinct. It's amazing. He doesn't have any storyteller refinement at all, but he often has a storyteller's. You seldom see him put a dramatic foot wrong. And it's seldom until after you've finished with a book of his that you realize how much more poorly it could have been done if he had not understood what he was doing. Like for instance, the confrontation with the genuine bad guy, the brains behind the evil. That's of course the more important of the two confrontations, right? That the evildoer is always going to be more important than his hired thugs. But L'Amour understands that the fight with the hired thug has to be the climax of the book, and a writer with less storytelling skill would not have thought that. He would have thought, well, no, the confrontation that's important is the one at the end. It's the ultimate one between the guy who's orchestrating the evil and the guy who's orchestrating the resistance to evil. So if I use my storyteller English 101 slide rule, it means their confrontation should be last. That doesn't happen in this book. Instead, we get a confrontation between Rock Bannon and a gigantic mountain of muscle. And when it starts, and it quickly... L'Amour gives it a couple of pages, which doesn't sound like much, but it's an eternity for a fight scene. And when it starts, it is obvious that L'Amour is going to write a grotesque action sequence, not a dirty, dusty, savage, desperate action fight, instead of something cool out of an espionage novel, for instance. When the fight was going on, I was reminded of Deadwood. Those of you who know the show Deadwood will need no more indication than that about what I'm thinking about. Just when you talk to a Deadwood fan and you say, "What about the fight?" Well, Deadwood's full of fights, so a newcomer to the show might think, "Well, that could mean anything." But no. When it's a Deadwood fan and you say the fight, you know exactly what they're talking about, and that's exactly what it's like here. Absolutely brutal. And there can be only one winner. It's not like you're gonna reach a draw or anything like that. And the ultimate momentum of the story is blurred a little, blunted just a tiny bit by the fact that the ending is known. Those westward waves of settlers, whether they fall into the hands of con men or whether they fall into the hands of men like Rock Bannon, they're going to keep coming. They're going to keep coming. When you look at you think, okay, the individual fate of these individual people, sure, that I'm a little on tenterhooks because of that, but the whole shape of what is happening here, no, that's going to happen. Las Vegas casinos are still going to be in existence. They are still the end run of this whole game. And L'Amour blunts that. He he gets around that as well as he can, as well as anyone can. So this was really enjoyable. It was an hour to read, and it was really, really enjoyable. It was just what I needed as a pick-me-up, as a turnaround of the Western that I'd read before. No real offense to Peter Brandvold. He's a pretty good writer. But this is exactly what I needed. This is a true believer, someone who believes what he's doing. Even if I don't always agree with that, at least he believes it. So I may indulge in another Louis L'Amour tonight. I don't know. I don't know. We will see. I probably will. I have a bunch of those paperbacks. I might as well read them. So I add to my night's reading as the day goes on. But there'll be a Western in that reading. So I'll report back on what it is next time. Thank you.